morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm originally a Wicklow man. My club is Annacurra, right down on the Wicklow-Wexford border. My father was a Kerry man, just outside Ballybunion. My mother was from Doonbeg in West Clare, so I was kind of bound to play football. And luckily, I played football for Wicklow at different levels, up to senior. And then in my mid-20s, I transferred to Kilmacud Crokes, where I was lucky enough to be there during the 90s when things started to kick off for Crokes. So I now live in East Cork, down in Middleton. I spent a lot of time in Dublin, and I'm a member of the club in Middleton, and I'm involved down there at the minute with trying to do a little bit with the senior hurlers around data and things like that. So that's me. One of the things, demographics, what it's about, like it's really just about the population and the composition of the population. And I think we're all aware that Ireland is changing. But sometimes we don't realise how much it's changing because it's like boiling a frog, and we're certainly like frogs at the minute. But it's not all about the numbers around GAA. And I tell you that the demographics are really, really important, and having good quality data is really important. But as we all know, it's not just about the numbers. If it was just about the numbers, Dublin would have won every All-Ireland in hurling and football since the GAA was established. So it's a lot more than that. The problem with figures, and one of my challenges is to try and keep you all awake. You're probably all afraid now you're going to be bored to tears listening to me over the next 20 minutes or so. So I'm going to try and keep you awake by not throwing too much numbers at you, but by really talking more a little bit about some of the key trends. And I can't get into the key trends down at every county, but you'll be able to see a fairly consistent picture. And then I'm going to just talk a little bit about what that might mean for the GAA. And it's just my perspective, right? So it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just an opinion. We all have opinions in this room. So I'm just going to put it out there, and maybe it'll just give you something to react to and to respond to. And that's what I'm going to try and do. But unfortunately, with these demography, the devil is in the detail, and you have to get down into the detail, and I'll show a little bit of that. So this is very simply just this graph. I don't know, hopefully you can all see it, but it goes from 1841 right up to 2022, and it's the total population of Ireland. And you can see back before the famine, we had over 6 million people. The population fell consistently right down to 1961, when we had a population of 2.8 million. And now in the most recent census in 2022, we're back up over 5 million. So that's generally been how population, how the number of people in Ireland has changed over that period of time. 2022 was the first time we went over 5 million in this country since 1851. So a kind of fairly seminal change, a fairly big change. It's been happening over time, of course. It just didn't happen overnight, but it's been happening since 1961 on an ongoing basis. The population growth between 16 and 22 was 8%. Between the two previous censuses, it was about 4%, 3.8% or thereabouts. So you can see huge changes taking place. And the current projections are that the population will exceed 6 million by 2040, right? And that's based on current estimates around fertility, which is the number of births, and obviously migration, of course. We all know migration can change quickly, but on current assumptions around migration, the expectation is that we'll be over 6 million by 2040. That's a huge level of change in a very short period of time. And it requires us all to be adaptable and flexible and to pivot pretty quickly, actually, because we're all trying to tap into this, and these are the people we want playing our games. The population across the 32 counties has gone over 7 million. So this is across the island of Ireland. And we're currently working with NISRA, who'd be our counterpart in Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Statistical Research Agency. And we're going to be publishing a 32-county demographic piece. We're hoping it'll be by the end of May. And I think that'll be very interesting for the GAA. So hopefully that'll be very, 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 very beneficial. So let's just get into a little bit now. And I don't want to bury people in figures, and sorry if I do, but if you look at this, you can see that if you look at the age cohort 0 to 9 age cohort, that cohort has fallen by 7%. So we're talking about the population of Ireland growing by 8%. But here's an example of where the devil is in the detail. The 0 to 9-year-olds fell by 7% between census 2016 and 2022. They're the future playing cohort for us. Now, mightn't have fallen in every single county or every single parish, but that's the general trend. The population aged 25 to 39, who are our current cohort of players, fell by 4% in the same 6-year period. And if I look at the age group 20 to 34 as a whole, it's relatively flat. So this is where the devil is in the detail. This is where we need to understand what's going on. And actually, the age cohort that's growing quickest is the over 70s. We have an ageing population. We have a growing population, but we have an ageing population. Over 70s grew by 25% between 16 and 22. And this is where, you talk about the policy side about pensions. This is where the worry is around pensions. We're not too worried about that in the GAA at the minute. But this map then, I tried to do a map and I said, look at the 5 to 34-year-olds, that's our cohort of playing population now. And if you look at that map, now all areas are growing, but you can see the counties where that population is under pressure. Donegal, Mayo, Kerry, Tipperary, Kilkenny, a couple of things there. You can also see where it's growing strongly. Please, Longford, ignore. We have a new tourism amenity in Longford where we had a lot of people staying there on census night, and it artificially... So what we need to talk about for Longford is the usually resident population rather than the population there in the night. There's the devil in the detail, right? So let's just be conscious of that. I then just want to look at what's happening in each county. How is the population in each county changing, right? And of course, the good thing is that the population in every county is growing, but that might be necessarily good for the GAA because it depends on what's driving the change in each individual county, right? But again, there's a trend here, and it's east-west. I just drew a line down there in the middle. I hope you can see it. But the fastest growing counties, no surprise, are in the eastern half of the county, and the slowest growing counties are in the western side of the country. And again, you're looking there, Mayo, Donegal, Kerry, under pressure. Tipperary and Kilkenny, interestingly, under pressure, right? Now, when I say under pressure, you're still growing, but not as quickly as the other counties, right? But the fastest growing counties are Meath, they grew 13% in 6 years. Fingal, we use the administrative counties because Dublin is so big. Fingal, 12%, and Kildare, 11%, right? So there's an east-west thing. You can see it, and it's been happening over time. You look at this slide, and there's also a bit of an east-west thing. So what I decided to have a look at was just what's the average age of each county? It's kind of interesting to look at that because that's also useful for us from a GAA perspective. The average age of the population in Ireland is just under 39 years, all right? But if you could draw a line down the middle. The darker colours are those counties with higher average age. Oldest county, Mayo, 41.6 years. Kerry, 41.5 years. Roscommon, 40.8. But the counties with the highest average ages are all on the western side of the country, more or less. Youngest counties, as again you can see, Fingal, 36, Kildare, just shy of 37, Meath, 37. So whether it's a change in the population or average age, you're beginning to see a bit of a trend. So it's not just the composition but from an age perspective that's important. It's where are people living? And this is also a trend, and not just in Ireland, but this is a general trend, which is urbanisation, right? In 1961, 54% of the population of Ireland lived in rural Ireland, whereas now, in the most recent census, it's down to 36%, right? And that's an interesting, and by the way, there's nothing to suggest that trend is going to change, right? So that's just the reality. We can't change the demography, but we can be aware of it and start considering how we adapt and how we pivot around it. Sometimes we think urbanisation is all about moving to Dublin, because that's what a lot of us did. I lived in Dublin for 16 years. But there's an awful lot of urbanisation in rural counties as well. So you're seeing even in what you might consider as traditional or rural counties like Mayo and Kerry, people are moving into the big centres like Castlebar and Westport and towns like that. So what you see is the big towns in rural counties are beginning to grow as well. And I think that's interesting. And some of the things you're seeing in these places, so you have, where the population is high, you've probably loads of players, but you don't have great facilities. And then in the rural areas, you have fewer players, but you probably have better facilities. So it's a kind of we have the players in the wrong place and we have the facilities in the wrong place. That's not a criticism, it's just the way things are. And in a way, it's increasingly the way things are because of the way the population is changing and the way people are now living their lives and this shift towards urban Ireland, right? So just to kind of look at that in a little bit more detail and thinking outside of Dublin, right? We decided just to look at towns that have populations of more than 10,000 and which towns in that category grew most in the last 6 years. And again, if you just look at the list, right, so the highest percentage, it's ranked by percentage growth, not the absolute numbers. But again, no surprise, the top there, all towns around Dublin. Laytown, Bettystown, Naas, Ashbourne, Greystones and Delgany and Wicklow, Kildare, Maynooth, Gorey, okay, Carrigaline on the outskirts of Cork, obviously. Dundalk, Wicklow Town, Malahide. No surprise there, right? All fast-growing towns. But it's quite interesting, and this is why I was saying earlier on, it's not all about the numbers. You look at Naas there, one of the fastest-growing towns, 3 county titles in a row, 2 Leinster finals in a row. And then you contrast with Tralee, which is a really big town. You know, what, 27,000 people down in Tralee, still growing by 11%. And we're all aware of the challenges that are being faced in Tralee. Probably not a demographic issue in Tralee, lots of people, but it's not leading to success. So it's not all about the numbers. We need to be aware of the numbers, but we need to think about how we address them. I think the Uachtaráin mentioned this about volunteerism. It's kind of the heartbeat of the CSO, fell into my job there, the GAA lads. But like, again, if you look at volunteerism rates, which are key for us, and I should have brought up my glasses with me, but the average in Ireland, we did some figures from the census and we were looking at volunteering rates, and you're looking at what proportion of the population are volunteering for one or more activity, and it's about 14% of the population. And then who volunteers for sporting organisations, it's 5.6, and that sporting now is GAA, rugby, soccer, the whole lot, right? But it's just to try and give you a sense. But look at where the volunteerism rates are highest. Look at the counties: Galway, Leitrim, Cork, Kenny, Tip, Clare, Roscommon, Monaghan, Cavan, primarily the western side of the country. So it's a really interesting thing that's going on. So I just wanted to have a little bit of a look at Dublin and see what the volunteerism rates were like in Dublin and see where they're highest and see could it give us any messages, right? And I don't know, can you see? Well, you'll see it there. Look at the north side. The darker colours is where the volunteerism rates are higher. And if you look at the darker colours in the north side of Dublin there, Na Fianna, Fingallions, Nave Marnogue, St. Sylvester's, Castleknock, all really, really beginning to be very successful, growing clubs, high volunteerism rates. You look at the south of the county, the darker colours down here towards the bottom, Kilmacud Crokes, Ballyboden, St. Enda's, Coola, all in those areas. Now, I'm not saying there's a direct correlation, but it's just interesting that these things kind of highlight things that you could be looking at. And I think maybe in a way this highlights the importance of volunteerism and how we need to focus on getting more and more people into our association and how that can help us drive success. I'm not going to dwell on this. This is about immigration. When you talk about demography, you kind of have to touch on immigration and net migration. But this is about the Irish population. And the blue line is Irish people emigrating. The yellow line is Irish people coming home. And the green line is the net position, right? And surprise, surprise there, you can see in the period 2009 to 2016, net outward migration of Irish people. The usual thing, an economic crash in Ireland, and traditionally immigration has been the valve for Irish people. And you see it there in the net migration figure, Irish people going abroad. Since then, recovering a bit, and now we're in a relatively neutral position from a migration perspective. And this is just the Irish population. I'm not talking about the non-Irish population, which gives you a very different picture. So let's move beyond the data and just have a quick chat. And I'm sorry for going on so much, but we know the data. I haven't told you anything that most of you didn't know already coming into the room this morning. And I'm probably not going to tell you anything new now, but I'm just going to maybe just give a perspective on it. I think the establishment of the demographics committees is a really good initiative. I think it's really, really important. But one of the things I'd ask is, let's have 32 committees working in isolation from one another, right? Let's try and learn from one another, because, some people will have some successes with things, so we can learn from each other, avoid the same mistakes, and maybe learn from what's working, right? So that's something that I just something that came to me I thought might be interesting to look at. This demographics thing is difficult, though, because it's easy to define the problem, but the solution isn't simple, because the solution can be different for different parts of the country. It can even within a county, it can have different implications, because there can be club-specific issues, as we all know, at times that we need to be conscious of. But I do think there are things that we can do at central level and commonly across that might begin to help, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Demographics, we sometimes think that the demographics is just going to impact on rural Ireland, but it's not. It's having a huge impact on urban Ireland as well. and on the GAA in both rural and urban areas. So some of the other things that impact us, obviously demographics, but the GAA, we no longer have that. When I grew up in Wicklow, there was nothing else. It was just football when I grew up, right? And if you didn't play football, you were left on your own. And in a way, it was great. So like we were able to kind of maybe rest back because there'd be no problems with getting engagement and recruiting players. But the world has totally changed now, right? So there's so many options for kids. Like we often talk in the CSO about the economy we're measuring, the society we're measuring is changing every single day. So as an organisation, the CSO, we have to evolve and adapt. And I think the GAA is in the same way. The society we're trying to get to play our games is changing dramatically. So that means we have to continually change and evolve with that. Now, it's very difficult, I understand that. But I suppose we can't ignore the issue and think it's going to go away. We all know that tradition and culture are really key factors, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, what I mean about that. Facilities are key. Coaching is really important, and we put a huge investment in the GAA into coaches in the last few years. Sorry, not last few years, over the last 10, 20 years. But when I mean holistic, my view is it's not just about developing skills, it's about developing people. It's about developing kids. Like as coaches, you can have a hugely positive impact on a person, or you can have a very negative impact on a person. And I can only talk from my own personal experience. I wouldn't be where I am today without the GAA, and that's a fact. It's been everything to me my whole career. And I wouldn't have managed to be successful in my career without a couple of key coaches. There are two, Tommy Lyons and Robbie Kelleher, are two guys that had a huge influence on me, not just as a footballer, but as a person and about the way I think about things. So we can have a huge impact on people, not just about their ability to play games, but in how we set them up for life. And they will always appreciate that. And they will always come back and help the organisation if we kind of give people that sense. Now, that puts a lot of responsibility on coaches. I often think about, you'll see the Jack the lads and they've no problem, but you'll see the young fella on the periphery or the young girl on the periphery who might struggle socially. And we kind of need to be conscious of those people because they could be our best footballer in 4 or 5 years' time. They just lack a little bit of confidence. They're not that good socially. Can we help them? Is that something we're talking to our coaches about? Is that putting too much responsibility on coaches? It's just a question, but it's something that I think we can think about. I think club recruitment is going to be a big issue, particularly in urban areas, because there's huge competition. We've spoken about the engagement. Funding is important, and it's not just money, it's how it's used, I suppose. And like you look at Dublin and you look at Limerick, huge success, a lot of funding, but it was used effectively. Money isn't just the answer, it has to be used properly. But I think it's important. I think the transition from juvenile to adult is really, really important and how that's managed. We can't be affording to lose people. And I suppose we have to ask, how are we managing that transition? Does under 17 to 20, is that a harder transition than under 18 to under 21? It's just a question. I don't have the answer. Should we be having people in our clubs and in our counties who focus on that cohort who are transitioning from juvenile to adult? Because that's a really difficult transition. Should we dedicate people to that, to say, you're minding those 15 fellas or those 16 fellas or those 16 girls this year, and we're going to make sure we try and keep as many of them as possible to play adult. That's a metric of success for me. And the schools play a huge part, I think, in maintaining the strength of our games. And I think where our games are strong, you'll see the schools play a really active role in supporting that. Challenges in urban areas. Scale. The population growth in some of our urban areas is staggering. How in the name of God do you keep every young fella and young girl who wants a game happy? I was talking to a few fellas in Crokes and they have 120 and 130 at under 8, under 9, under 10, under 11, under 12, under 13, the whole way up. Maybe 120, maybe even more. And not just Crokes, there's so many clubs in Dublin like that. And outside of Dublin as well, or urban. How do you manage that? How do you give game time to all those kids? How do you have the facilities? Like, you need pitches. We need pitches for all these kids. So that's a big challenge in urban areas, is the facilities. I used to remember up in Crokes on a Saturday morning, back in the 90s. It was absolute mayhem back then. I can't even begin to imagine what it's like there now. Volunteers. If you're going to have 80, 90, 100 kids at every age group up along, you need a huge number of volunteers and a huge number of parents getting involved to try and support that type of level of activity. The question is it sustainable? And I don't know, what's the answer? Do you need more clubs in some of these urban areas? Do we need to, God forbid, this is heresy now and don't tell anybody I said it, do we need more clubs in some urban areas to try and accommodate the number of kids that we have and the growing populations in those areas? It's only a question, but I think we have to ask ourselves these hard questions even if they're difficult for us. I think there's also this piece, and I actually think it was mentioned earlier on, that the GAA is becoming a kind of a perception at least that is becoming a middle-class game, in particularly in urban Ireland. You can see it in the urban areas. And you ask yourself why and what are the implications of it? And I just wonder if it's down to the fact that parents now recognise the benefits to physical and mental well-being for children being involved in team sports. And are parents in middle-class areas more aware and more conscious of that than others? It's only a question. I don't know. But we need to be thinking about that. And we need to be thinking about what happens in those areas that are more working class. I remember when I was in Dublin, it was Crokes and Erin's Isle 3 years in a row. Crokes kept going, Erin's Isle struggling. Different types of the city. What's driving that? What has happened? So we need to be asking those questions. How do we integrate the new Irish? 12% of our population is now non-Irish. And I think integrating the new Irish is going to be a key challenge for the GAA in the next 5-10 years, because I think there's real opportunities for us there. And I think it could be particularly important. Well, I said it's particularly important in urban areas, but actually it's going to be important in rural areas as well, because, you know, people are coming into our country and they're living in every part of the country. So it's something we have to try and think about and tap into. And I think the recruitment is a real issue. You know, I can imagine in Erin's Isle that probably part of the challenge is the success of Na Fianna. You know, the focus of facilities maybe in Na Fianna and Castleknock and these peripheral clubs. That could be part of the challenge. I don't know. People from Dublin will have a much better sense. And it's not just in Dublin. Obviously, every county we're seeing these kinds of challenges. You know, you look at the north side of the city in Cork, where like I'm involved with Middleton this year, and you look at the north side of the city now, and there's no senior hurling team in the north side of the city. The Glen got relegated this year, and the Piercing a few years ago. Now, I didn't necessarily think the Glen deserved to be. I think they took their eye off the ball a little bit, but it's an issue for us. What's driving that in the north side of the city in Cork? And I'm sure that's kind of being replicated in other parts of the country. In rural areas, the challenge is, do you actually have the players? Do you know, I can remember playing under 21 at the age of 16, not because I was good, but because I'm from a very small rural club, and it was all hands on deck, and we wanted to field our own team. But that's the challenge in rural areas, first of all, is do you have the players? So that's the very first thing. And by the way, you can't do anything about it. They're either there or they're not there. But how you try indeed where the numbers are tight, retention is really important. You need every young fella that's starting in junior infants, you need to get into the school, and you need to say, lads, we train on Saturday morning, come on down, and you have to make it fun for them, as the Uachtaráin was saying earlier on. For young kids, you need to bring them in, and we need to keep them. And that's particularly important in rural areas. So that player retention, I think this demographic challenge is going to put a premium on things like retention, engagement, and volunteerism. And if that's the focus, what are the things we need to do to try and retain that? I think we need to recognise the primacy of the young people in playing our game and minding them. And I often wonder about this win at all costs, like we're all GAA people, right? We love to win. It's what it's about. We all talk about winning the championship. But the win at all costs, you know, we've all been at juvenile games and you see the coaches or maybe parents on the sideline going mad, and sometimes you're saying, Jesus, like really? It's an under 11 match, lads, or under 12 match? Like, it's not a senior championship match, and we lose context a little bit sometimes. And what happens to that young fellow who's on the periphery, who kind of struggles in that kind of an environment? Are we going to lose him? And sometimes I think we think about short-term success, but sometimes the price of short-term success is long-term failure. And I think we have to ask ourselves is, what are the metrics of success? And I was talking to a fella, he was the chairman of my own club at home, and he said about 8 years ago, they sat down and they said, our metrics of success is the number of young fellas we have coming into the club day one, and then number two, how many of them do we keep playing at senior level? And they wanted to be competitive then at intermediate and hopefully move up to senior level. But our metrics of success, we probably need to think about that a little bit, particularly I think in the juvenile game, because we want to get as many of them going forward. Amalgamations, can we accept that this is a necessary step? I think we can. I think it's happening in a lot of counties where clubs have to come together. And I think that's a good thing, because we want our young fellas and our young girls playing games. But is it always necessary? Kind of anecdotally, I've heard of 1 or 2 cases where there's been amalgamations where one of the clubs going into the amalgamation could have fielded their own team. Is that I don't know if that's happening, but I've heard 1 or 2 cases where it's happening. And I think the challenge with that then is you're going in so you're competitive, but some of your own lads aren't getting game time because they're not going to be good enough to play. I also hear about some of these clubs where you have under 15, under 16, under 17, and you want to win the under 16 championship. And you bring up the best under 15, even though you have enough under 16s. We've all been there, we know the temptation, but is it the right thing to do? Are you going to retain kids in an environment like that over the long term? So given the challenges we're facing, that might have been okay in the past, but is it going to be okay for the future? I don't know the answer, but it's just a question. And of course, if we don't have enough players, sometimes even amalgamation, if you've only 1 or 2 players in your club, you know, amalgamation probably isn't going to be facilitated by another club. So you're going to be willing to, so in Annacurra, am I going to allow a fella to go and play in Tinnehealy or in Ockram? God forbid, but it's the right thing for the lads to do because we have to facilitate our young fellas to play games, and we all see that over time. So, concluding comments, and Paddy, I'm really sorry for going on, but in every job, like, you know, like I think about in the CSO, we've releases out every single day, but I can't worry about that. My job is to think about the CSO in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time, right? And it's very hard to do because the operational is actually, it's very often it's the urgent and it can take over from the important. And I can only imagine what it's like for you guys, referees, fixtures, club games, county games. It's so easy to get caught up in the operational stuff. But I think we also have to know, I think there's a real imperative on us now, given the challenges we're facing, to focus on the strategic stuff. So I think we really need to support the demographics officers and the demographics committees and that broader range of strategic issues that we're trying to deal with in the association, because I think they're going to be very important for us. I think that the demography puts a premium on it, as I said earlier on, things like engagement, retention, volunteerism. How do we address that? How do we make sure that stays high? How do we get them in? How do we keep them? How do we get parents involved? How do we develop our coaches? I think information is important. It's not the only thing, but it's important. And I think the GAA has a huge resource in the registration data. Every club has to register their players, sends it into the county board, sends it on to the GAA. I've been talking to Peter Horgan here, who's doing great work. But the quality of that data, we need to put a focus on that, because that can be a huge resource, not just for your club, but for your county and for the national level. So one of my pleas is just kind of focus on that, try and get the quality of the data really, really good. I've talked about the holistic coaching. I'm kind of passionate about that because I think it had a huge beneficial impact for me. And I think probably for all of us. Hopefully everybody here, we've all had positive experiences in the GAA, and it's been very important to us in our lives and in our careers, not just in our sporting lives. I think the good facilities are really going to be important, but they're not always in the right places now, given the demographic challenges. And I think that final thing about that, we think we need to ask ourselves about that transition from juvenile to adult. I think that's a key piece for us. How do we keep all our juveniles playing in our association, in our games? And that's a big retention problem. So I'm going to shut up and leave the floor open to all you. So look, I should have said it. I really appreciate the invitation. It's very rare. I don't normally talk to an organisation like this. It's normally a room full of statisticians or policymakers. So it's nice to be amongst friends in the GAA. So thanks very much for listening to me.
A big thank you to Pádraig, and I will be taking, if there's one or two questions, we'll just get time to put them in. I just want to throw one question, Pádraig, your way, first of all, because it struck me there as Pádraig was talking that, you know, we're all going back to our county units here now, and we certainly have food to thought in terms of the numbers of clubs, the reach, our approach towards young players, etc. Just within the wider data that you have within the CSO, etc., it's that sense that we used to, I think, and working with young people, we used to always think that the competitor was other sports. I think the competition now is about the lifestyles of young people and their expectations and what they get up to other than sport. And how engaged are they with the notion of particularly team sport? Is there any data floating around or perceptions as to where young people's lives are being brought at the moment, and how do we tap into that back at county level?
Yeah, there's not a lot of data, not a lot of kind of hard official data on that stuff, Paddy, but like I think we're kind of seeing it in our job, like the response rates to all our surveys are falling. And that's because people are living in different ways. Like years ago, we used to be able to collect an awful lot of data from households between 5 and 9 at night. But people aren't at home between 5 and 9 anymore because people's lives now are far busier than they were 5 and 10 years ago. And kids' lives are far busier. Like parents kind of have every minute of every hour of every day for their kids allotted, whether it's piano, ballet, hurling, football. Like it just seems to me everything is so structured. And then we also have a whole cohort of kids, and it could be in certain cohorts of the population where they're not active at all, they're not involved in any kind of physical activity, like they're all on their PlayStations and Nintendos and Game Boys, and those kids are at home and they think they're playing sports because they're on FIFA. But, you know, they'd be much better off spending an hour or two out in our pitches. And I think that's one of the challenges, Paddy, for us, that, you know, years ago, you didn't have those, people's lives were far more active years ago. I think kids' lives now are less active. And I think we need to try and tap into that. And I think that ties into the physical and mental well-being piece.
Excellent, very good. I know we do a good pause time when we're looking for questions. We don't have pause time. I want to get the question straight away. We have one straight away.
How are you? Brendan Morse from Dublin. In terms of the growth, you say to 2040, what's the expected birth rate? Is it expected to stay around the late 60s? Yeah,
well, like at the minute, births are around 57, 58,000, right? They peaked in 2009 at about 75,000 a year, right? So births are always going to be in that range of kind of 55 to 70,000. But I think what we need to look at, and I had a slide and I took it out because I thought it was too much detail. If you look at the change in the population, what actually drives the trend in the change in the population of Ireland is not fertility rates, it's actually net migration. So net migration is really the key because, you know, we have two different fertility assumptions. You have a low fertility assumption and a high fertility assumption. But the most conservative fertility assumption is what we've used to suggest that the population will grow by 1 million by 2040. But that could be blown out of the water in the morning if there's an economic crisis, because net migration will always dwarf the natural increase, which is the difference between births and deaths.
I've been on a few demographic committees, and in relation to Dublin, there's 2 points struck me. One is about mindset. Parents want best in class. So you were talking about Erin's Isle earlier on. Secondly, in terms of where you picked over this high volunteerism, it's middle class areas. I think that's a problem we have in association in Dublin. I was involved in a project with the 4 counties in Dublin's doorstep a number of years ago, and something struck me in a major town. We asked how do they deal with the hemorrhage, around 14, 15 at the time, and they said it's not a hemorrhage, it's a safety valve, because they didn't want more teams because they hadn't got the facilities. Yeah. And it's that mindset, it seems to be a big, big problem. Social mobility, and the other one is best in class. You talked about Kilmacud, but if you try to set up a club near a big club, the parents will want to send their kids to the better club, well, their perception of a better club. So there's a big, big change that we have to deal with in terms of mindset.
That's a good observation. Yeah. Okay, we'll take 2 more questions, and one here, and then Pat Doherty, just over here. Chair.
Hello there, Eamon Brennan Longford. In relation to the New Irish and involving more of them in the competitions or in our games, are there any strategies that they use in Warwickshire, Lancashire, London and New York? Obviously the ethnic group of the Irish is the key, but there must be other things going on to attract people who are 2nd and 3rd generation over there. Yeah. And is there any evidence in that? And if not, it might be no harm to investigate that, you know? Yeah,
again, there's a bit of work that's been done, research around integration, but it's not necessarily integration into sports. So I don't have access to, I'm not as familiar with that as I could be. So I don't have an answer for you. I think, though, the schools are going to be key, because no matter who comes into our country, they're going to be going to school. And I think if we can try and focus on the schools and make sure that our schools are promoting our games, I think that's a really, really important piece, you know, because we can all see in counties where you've got, you know, like St. Kieran's and Kilkenny, Middleton CBS and Cork, the schools play a key role, I suppose, in that whole retention piece as well. So I'm not an expert in that area, but I would have thought that maybe the schools are one opportunity around the engagement. Yeah, sorry.
Excellent, thanks. And Pat?
Yeah, thanks, Paddy. Pádraig, I suppose just to follow on to Brendan's question, really in terms of the sort of a 20% increase in population over the next, whatever it is, 17, 19 years or thereabouts, and Brendan's question in relation to the birth rates, and your answer in terms of the net migration. In terms of, you know, I suppose the second slide you showed, which was the decrease in population and age and the increase in the over 75s, I think you said. in terms of that sort of potential million increase, have you got detail, and I'm not asking you for full detail, but have you got detail in terms of where the age cohort will be over the next sort of 15, 18, 20 years?
Yeah, we have, I mean, you know yourself, projections are difficult because the minute you publish projections, they're out of date. But we have details, yeah. We have kind of categories of age cohorts where we can show we expect the numbers in each cohort, because we can phase it forward, obviously the 0 to 4s, 5 to 9s, etc. So yeah, we do have that detail, and that would be interesting to look at. But again, the one thing I do want to say about the projections are so sensitive to net migration, and net migration is so sensitive to the performance of the economy, and obviously the economy can change at any time. So we can have a projection now, but we don't anticipate, we can't predict when the next financial crisis is going to be or when the next economic downturn is going to be. So you have to work with what you have at the time.
Pádraig, we would like to thank you for coming here and sharing such rich data, not just the data, but the thought and the thinking behind it and how it impacts on the lives of young people, the lives of our association and how we would go. And I think that Pádraig has highlighted to us throughout today that certainly data is subject to change, trends are subject to change, but there are consistencies there that we have to tackle. One is urbanisation and the effects of urbanisation. And I couldn't help but think, as we talk to my Monaghan friends, maybe of the same observation, we probably have 7 or 8 between large villages and towns in Monaghan. And it struck me, there's only one of them playing senior football out of all. So probably way more than half of our entire population. And there's only one small town that's putting out a senior football team. And yet we're the old catchphrase about Monaghan punching above our weight all around the place. So we're probably, and I think this is something that, go back to the McNamee report way back decades ago, that the GAA and sporting organisations struggle with urbanisation, and urbanisation is very local to all of us. And I think the other thing is that the lives of young people has changed. We have been very good at inclusion, but reaching lots of young people and using that data is something that the demographics officers and that whole movement towards demographic curiosity within this association will send us in good term. I think we're very blessed to have Pádraig here this morning, and a big round of applause for him for his work.
Thanks, Paddy. Thank you.